Welcome back to Hillel Neuer, international human rights lawyer and the executive director of UN Watch, the leading independent watchdog holding the United Nations accountable for both bias and double standards. Neuer has become one of the most prominent voices challenging human rights abuses on the global stage. He is widely known for confronting authoritarian regimes at the United Nations Human Rights Council and has testified before the UN and US Congress and has become one of the most outspoken critics of moral failures at the world stage leading human rights body. Over the years, his work has brought attention to issues ranging from political repression in Iran and China to the treatment of dissidents across the Middle East. His speeches have reached millions online. Hillel has confronted dictatorships head on, exposed moral inversions in international institutions, and given a voice to the voiceless, all while becoming a target for those who prefer silence. Welcome back, Hillel Neuer.
Thank you.
It's great to have you on the show. Recently, I saw that your organization, the UN Watch, has released a new 104-page report called From Watchdogs to Ideologues, which finds that the United Nations top human rights experts have actually abandoned the role of independent monitors and are instead advancing politicized agendas that erode the credibility of the international human rights systems. Why did you write the report and what did you find?
Well, we wrote the report because the UN rapporteurs are more influential than ever. There are about 86 of these so-called independent human rights experts. They're sometimes called special rapporteurs. They're sometimes called independent expert. And they get quoted by International Court of Justice, International Criminal Court, European courts, national courts, CNN, New York Times. Every major institution is quoting the UN experts. You see a headline, UN experts said. But who are the UN experts? So if you ask Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the UN, the line of the Secretary General is always the UN experts, the special rapporteurs are the crown jewel of the UN human rights system. Who are they? Who appoints them? Who funds them? How do they do their work? Who holds them accountable? Well, our report decided to do a deep dive. And sadly, if you would read the literature in legal academia or human rights academia, when writing about the rapporteurs, it is almost never critical in any way. They don't ask these questions, all the questions that I just asked. If so, it's very rarely and done in a very weak way. They rally very much behind the rapporteurs and I would say fail in their job to ask these questions. So too, think tanks like the Brookings Institute, it's a major think tank, was actually funded by Qatar. But they did a major report on the rapporteurs, and they asked some questions here and there, but nothing that's really critical. They too put out the rapporteurs as the great defenders, and we found something very different. Very different. We looked at 1/5 of the mandates. There are 59 different mandates, including on torture, on freedom of expression, violence against women. Then you have things like toxic waste. Then you have about a dozen on countries, on North Korea, on Sudan, of course, on Palestine. So we looked at them. And I'll just share with you briefly some of the findings. First thing to understand is the 59 different mandates. I mentioned some of them. Some of the mandates are good. An expert, a rapporteur on freedom of speech. That's good. We want someone who will go around the world and will protect freedom of speech. It's under attack in many countries. Torture, violence against women. These are all mandates that are good. Again, the question is, who holds the mandate and how do they carry it out? That's an important question. But first, we can acknowledge that these mandates are positive. You then have mandates where the mandates themselves are pernicious, political, sometimes pathological. I'll mention one example. The UN Special Rapporteur on the negative impact of unilateral coercive measures. I'll say that again. The Special Rapporteur on the negative impact of unilateral coercive measures. What are those? That means sanctions. So, according to the UN Human Rights Council, and I should tell the viewers, who is the Human Rights Council? This is the 47-nation body. It's an important UN council, sits in Geneva, where I'm based. And the members include not Mother Teresa and not Jesus, but Cuba and Qatar and Pakistan and China, some of the world's worst regimes dominate. They're about 51% are rated less than free. Okay, and it could be full-on dictatorships or other countries that are not considered full democracies according to Freedom House with their ratings. So they are the council, and they appoint these rapporteurs, and they created a mandate about 10 years ago, maybe, that would say that all Western sanctions, so when the United States, Canada, the EU put sanctions on Assad, on the Ayatollah, on Zimbabwe for crushing their own people, and sanctions are put in to defend human rights champions, the Human Rights Council says the opposite. The Human Rights Council says, no, all sanctions are illegal. Okay. And they're so illegal that we need to create an investigator, special rapporteur, it's basically an investigator, who will all year round will investigate Western sanctions. And so the mandate itself is pernicious. And there's several mandates like that. There's another one created by the Cubans, which is called the Independent Expert for a Democratic and Equitable International Order. A democratic and equitable international order. That means, to translate that into normal English, that the world isn't fair. Okay, because the West has power and the rest, the poor Cubans and the poor Iranians and the Syrians and the Zimbabweans and the North Koreans, they're oppressed. And we need to make the world equitable. We need to make it fair. We need to make it democratic. And this is really propaganda by the world's worst dictatorships. So two different mandates the mandates themselves are pathological. Now let me tell you who are the mandate holders, who are the people. So I'm actually holding the report before me. You read it out. From Watchdogs to Ideologues, how politicized UN rapporteurs are subverting human rights. So I'm just going to open up the report. It's available on unwatch.org. And on page 74, you will find an examination of Alina Duhan. Alina Duhan. Briefly, who is Alina Duhan? So she's from Belarus. She works for the state university, which belongs to the regime, and she's very close with the Putin regime. Okay, and she's basically acted as a complete ideological puppet of the dictatorships. What has she done in her 6 years? Her mandate is going to end now after 6 years. She went to Zimbabwe. She was received by the president of the country, normally a UN rapporteur, not such a high-level position, not the Secretary General, but she was received by the dictator Emerson Mnangagwa, something like that. He's the successor of Mugabe and follows his policies, crush dissidents. We bring many of the Zimbabwean dissidents, journalists, to speak at the United Nations, testify about how they're crushing any dissent. One of them just spoke recently, and he's not able to go back to Zimbabwe because they threatened him. But she was received by the dictatorship, and she said, Zimbabwe is the victim, okay? Not the oppressor of journalists and dissidents and other activists, but they're the victim of Western sanctions. And all the problems in Zimbabwe are because of Western sanctions. And it was covered in the newspapers, and it was complete propaganda for Zimbabwe. Number one. Number two, she went to Caracas, Venezuela. The Venezuelans don't accept any UN investigators. They refused when they asked. They said, no, you can't come. But they rolled out the red carpet. She met Maduro. You could see the pictures. It was during COVID, so he or she are wearing their COVID masks. But she sees Maduro, and she says all the problems of Venezuela, the reason that 7 million people fled, 8 million people, it's not because of the horrible policies of Chavez and Maduro, which destroyed the country, but because of the West, because of America and Canada and the EU imposed sanctions. It's all because of the sanctions. She flies to Damascus. Same thing. Syria is a victim. Under Assad, not now under the wonderful guy, the terrorist with a tie, but under Assad. She flies to Tehran. There's a picture of her. She puts on the hijab, the head covering. She's speaking below a portrait of Ayatollah Khomeini, the original terrorist Ayatollah. And she's saying all the problems in Iran, lots of problems. It's all because of Western sanctions. She went to China. Again, you couldn't make this up if you wanted to. She flies to China and she gives a report. The Uyghurs, 1 million Uyghurs in camps. The Uyghurs, if there's any problems at all, it's because of Western sanctions against companies that use them as slave labor. So complete shameless propaganda. And the final thing I'll say about her is who pays for her? I'm going to go back to my report so people will know that I'm reading directly from the report. So I'm looking at page 75 from our report. You can find it on our website, unwatch.org, from Watchdogs to Ideologues. And we have here the funders, and I'm going to read it to you. Who's funding her? Now, this information I did not uncover through any complicated method. I didn't hack anyone. We found it on a UN website. They bury it buried in a document and a page and a this. We found it. And we discovered that in the year 2020, Vladimir Putin's Russia gave her office $115,000. Now, you may be surprised to know that the Russian regime of Vladimir Putin, which bombs innocent people every single day and throws dissenters in prison and killed Navalny in prison, that they're giving money for human rights. Well, 115,000 in 2020 to her office, in 2021, 150,000. Then we discover Qatar. Qatar gave her 25,000 in 2021, another 25,000 in 2022. China gave her, in total, over 5 years, gave her $980,000. This is disclosed. I don't know what's undisclosed. This is the disclosed amount. In total, we're talking about more than $1.3 million from Qatar, Russia, and China. And guess what? She's written many reports and done various events in favor of Qatar, Russia, and China. Why Qatar? There's no Western sanctions on Qatar, but the Gulf states had a little war with Qatar a number of years ago, and they were all Saudis and the Emiratis, they were sanctioning Qatar. So they brought her to speak about and make them a victim. So, and the same with Russia and China. China, I told you she went on a visit, but she also did a video 3-4 years ago. They did a video saying everything is great in Xinjiang. That's the province where the Uyghurs live and are persecuted. Everyone is happy in Xinjiang, and she appears on the video and goes along with the propaganda as she's getting $980,000 for her office. Bad enough that it's for her office, because how can you be an independent expert when the people you're writing about are paying you? Imagine a judge or a referee of a football game, and you find out, yeah, one team is paying him $980,000. It would be absurd. So, this is in a nutshell what we're facing.
So if we zoom out a little bit and look at the bird's eye view of this, what happened to the UN? Like, it started with good intentions, I guess, after the Second World War. But what happened, and why are all these like not so democratic countries at the table? And what do you see happening if we look at the historic perspective to the UN?
Look, the UN, the ideals were terrific from the beginning. These were the victors of World War II who defeated Hitler, a very idealistic time, and they really thought they would create a new world. And the UN Charter reflects that. It's a very beautiful document. It speaks about international peace, security, freedoms. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted 3 years later in December 1948, also speaks of right to life, a very important document. But if we look at the UN structure from the beginning, Stalin was there. He was a very bad guy, but there was a mixture between the idealism and realpolitik. Realpolitik was we need at the table those who are in charge, and that was Stalin. So he was there. Then the Germans and Japanese were out. They were the losers. Eventually, they were brought in as well. And I would say, despite Stalin, if you went around the room in 1945, most of the countries there were democracies. They were Western European democracies. There were South American democracies. They weren't perfect, but they weren't the world's worst regimes. Over time, the UN changed. 1960s, decolonization, Africa and Asia, many countries joined, not necessarily democracies. And the bad guys get very aggressive. Russia, China, Turkey, Egypt, many of these countries, Saudi Arabia, become more and more aggressive, more organized, and less shy. I would say Western countries once had a certain confidence that they were running the world. But by the time you get to the 1970s, Soviet Union is very clever, and they use all these non-aligned countries, the former colonies, to pit them against the West, and certainly against Israel. 1975, the UN General Assembly adopts the resolution pushed by the Soviets and the Arabs: Zionism is racism. So already by then, you have this automatic majority, which is going to go anything anti-Western or anti-Israel.
Speaking of Israel, is it true that the UN still has not unequivocally condemned October 7th?
I don't believe there's ever been a standalone resolution where you have such a condemnation. There may be a reference here or there, but in any meaningful way, I don't think they've ever done it in a meaningful way. And I would say, on the contrary, we've had, even if there's some references here and there, and I'm sure there are some references, we have to keep in mind the false equivalence, the false moral equivalence. Guterres, a few weeks after October 7th, came to the UN and he said, yes, I condemn the attacks by Hamas. But, he said, but it's also important to note the Hamas attacks did not happen in a vacuum. And he went on to enumerate numerous alleged Palestinian grievances against Israel, effectively justifying what they did. Now, he's not entirely wrong. When Guterres said the attacks did not happen in a vacuum, I agree. Actually, nothing any of us has done today or any time took place in a vacuum. We are influenced by our environment, by our family, by our friends, by everything that we've received, education, culture, and so forth. The attacks of Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. Who educated the Hamas terrorists? The thousands of terrorists who came over the border and committed some of the worst atrocities since the Holocaust, and thousands of civilians who joined them. What schools did they go to, Mr. Guterres? 90% of them, according to Johan Sufi of UNRWA, 90% of them went to UNRWA schools in Gaza. Those are UN schools. Mr. Guterres, you educated them. You educated the terrorists. They didn't come from a vacuum. You educated them. However, when he spoke, he couldn't muster up the minimum of self-reflection to understand that he himself was the one who educated them. Instead, he tried to turn the tables on Israel.
It seems like the UN has been hijacked by both extreme nations and extreme ideologies. Speaking of extreme nation, isn't it ironic that 54 nations, including Norway, actually nominated Iran to the UN's Committee for Program and Coordination to shape policy on women's rights, human rights disarmament, and terrorism prevention?
Look, you've identified two important points that are happening today. One is the toxic alliance between different extremes and radicals. You have radical regimes, whether it's North Korea, whether it's Iran, whether it's Cuba, whether it's China, that are totalitarian regimes, authoritarian totalitarian regimes that crush their own people, that throw dissenters in prison and so forth. And then you have the Gretas of this world. She's an extreme example, but you have the Amnesty Internationals. You have the entire world, a very powerful network of radical left NGOs, which are becoming more and more radical left. And, they embrace it. Francesca Albanese, who accuses Israel every day of genocide, who says Hamas is resistance, she is embraced by Amnesty International. A number of years ago, that would have been someone they would maybe think twice, but she's embraced by them. She's embraced by the universities. 3 Belgian universities absurdly gave her a doctorate. And what you have is they at the UN is where they come together because the dictatorships have the voting power. They're going to appoint the rapporteurs. They might fund them. But then once the rapporteurs are appointed, it's the Amnesty Internationals that work with them. Many of the rapporteurs used to work at Amnesty. The special rapporteur on freedom of speech, I mentioned, that's a good mandate. But the one who heads it, Irene Khan, is horrible. She, in one of her annual reports on freedom of speech, the only topic she talked about was pro-Palestinian activists and how their speech is being restricted, right? These are the people you see everywhere on the streets, bullying other people, threatening other people, fueling anti-Semitism. She's defending them. She's saying their freedom of speech is being restricted. That was her entire report, I think it was a year or two ago, to the General Assembly. The world expert on free speech, she's not flying to Venezuela. She's not flying to Iran. She's not flying to Cuba, where people are thrown into prison for saying a word. She flew to Germany. Why would the world expert on free speech fly to Germany, which sure has many issues, but it's probably one of the best countries in the world, probably in the top 10, top 15, when it comes to protecting freedom of speech? Because she said pro-Palestinian demonstrators are being restricted. That was her issue. So a mandate that was created by Western countries, which is to defend freedom of expression, the lifeblood of democracy, is being hijacked by this radical ideologue who used to be the head of Amnesty International. Irene Khan, around the year 2000 approximately, they announced finally a woman, a Muslim from Bangladesh, first Asian, first woman, first Muslim, going to be the head of Amnesty. When she headed Amnesty, she attacked America all the time. America's prison is like the Gulag. She attacked Israel, radical ideologue. Eventually, after several years, she was pushed out of Amnesty. They gave her a secret package of like $900,000 of a severance package. When it was revealed a year or two later, people at Amnesty were scandalized. They couldn't explain it. They apologized. And despite that, the scandal, which people can read about, she gets appointed UN rapporteur on free speech and so forth. So coming back to your question, you have these extremes and they work together. Radical regimes, Pakistan, Qatar, China, Cuba, Russia, and then Amnesty International and other so-called progressive groups work hand in hand because they agree on one thing: attack the West, attack America, attack capitalism, attack Israel. And on that, they're very happy to work together. They're all on the same page because that's why they get appointed. These dictatorships use their voting power to appoint the Francesca Albanese's, the Irene Khans, people like Greta. These are the extremists. I'll mention one other guy. His name is George Katrougalos. He's the expert for a democratic and equitable international order. He's going to make the world fair. He was a radical left politician in Greece. I think his party is called Syriza, radical left. He's very pro-China. When he was Greek foreign minister, he flew to China many times. He's been at the UN for over a year. Guess what? He got $100,000 to his office from China. How he spent the money, nobody knows. And guess what? In the same year he got $100,000 from China, he appeared at an event in Athens run by the Chinese promoting Xi Jinping's new book. And he's the keynote speaker. The wonderful vision of Xi Jinping, as that's with one hand, the other hand, he's taking $100,000 from China. So that's the radicals coming together. And the second question you asked about Iran happens all the time. On April 8th, the 54-nation Economic and Social Council met in New York to consider appointments to various commissions, one of which was to appoint new members to the UN Committee for Program and Coordination. Program and coordination sounds boring, sounds technical, sounds administrative. Who cares? Well, you open it up, and it turns out in the past month they had one that this is a UN committee that examines UN priorities for the whole United Nations and budget. And on one day, they're talking about women's rights, and they have before them the report of UN women. So priorities for women around the world. On one day, the committee is dealing with peacekeeping. On one day, terrorism prevention. On one day, human rights. So it matters. And guess what? The chair announces, we have a list with the Islamic Republic of Iran. I take it that everyone here wishes to nominate the Islamic Republic of Iran to this committee. Norway, silent, meaning they join consensus. The chairman says, no objections, done, adopted, officially nominated. In November, they rubber stamp the nominations. They always rubber stamp and approve the nominations. So Norway, together with UK, France, Canada, many other countries, quietly, shamefully joined consensus to nominate the murderous, misogynistic Islamic Republic of Iran, which killed an estimated 30, 40, 50,000 people in 2 days in January, to a committee that's going to deal with human rights. The group that beats, blinds, tortures women, rapes them for the crime of improper hijab, they're spending a day on women's rights. You couldn't make this up if you wanted to.
Regarding Iran, what are your thoughts about the developments with the new MOU between the US and Iran, the 14 points that they're supposedly going to sign tomorrow, Friday?
I think it's worrying. We haven't seen all of it, and it's hard to know from the different people speaking. We have the Iranian regime. They're not trustworthy about what they say. And then you have President Trump, who has a very distinctive way of speaking. He can sometimes say A and the opposite of A in the same sentence. We're going to totally destroy Iran. I think it was about a week ago. We're going to totally bombard them. And then great news, we have a peace deal, I don't know, within a few hours, the same language. And so it's a bit difficult to get the facts. From what we hear, from what is reported, because we haven't seen the official text yet, from what has been reported, it's worrying. It's worrying because there's provisions. Now, some may only come into place if this such and such happens, and such may never happen. But there is discussion of giving the regime money, liberating some $300 billion. This would be horrible. every dollar, every euro that goes to the Islamic regime of Iran funds their terrorism, funds their oppression of their own people. And you could say, oh, but it's only going to go for that. Well, if it only goes for buying grain, that just liberates the money that is fungible to go for sponsoring Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, killing their own people and killing their opponents in the region. So the money is very worrying. The idea that you're signing a peace deal, they're supposed to sign something maybe in Geneva very soon, that elevates them. If you have a significant Western American, there's never I don't think there was ever, um, you know, yeah, in recent years we haven't seen it, but to see the Americans now in a signing capacity that really elevates the regime at a time when they're discredited, their people are rising up. This gives them gravitas, it gives them legitimacy. So just the signing ceremony is a bad thing. And in general, the idea that they can have control over the Strait of Hormuz, the idea that they can still keep missiles, a lot of very worrying things. I do want to say that one has to give a certain amount of credit and to President Trump. No one has ever done what he did in the past 6 months, past year. In June, he sent U.S. Stealth bombers to attack Iran's nuclear installations together with Israel, and then in the past several months, they had a massive attack with thousands and thousands of U.S. airstrikes against Iranian military targets. That is unprecedented. He also killed Soleimani. So when it comes to Iran, we do have to give President Trump a lot of credit, and he does have a record of, fooling people. Before he struck Iran this year in epic fury, when he launched, he had at the White House Tucker Carlson, who's become a apologist for the world's worst regimes. Um, he was at the White House in a photo, and when I saw that, I was like, "Oh, well, if he has Tucker now and they're hanging out, I don't think he's going to attack Iran." And he fooled us, and he fooled the Iranians. So, if you ask me on paper to look at what we're hearing, it looks bad. It will look very bad. And at the same time, I give enormous credit to President Trump for what he's done so far, which no other U.S. president was willing to do, no other world leader other than Israel willing to do, which is to take on this murderous regime, destroying the Middle East and causing terror around the world. And he did a lot to erode them. He did a tremendous amount to erode them. So I give him some credit, but I hope that he's fooling us now as well. When he says these things like, they should have missiles too and all that kind of thing, I hope that he's fooling them. I understand he needs to bring the price of oil down for the U.S. consumers, and so maybe there's a strategy that for a certain amount of time, maybe before up until the midterm elections in November, he wants to stand back and make some deals, and maybe afterwards, in his last 2 years, no more midterms. Maybe we'll have epic fury number 2 and take out the regime.
Do you think if Iran ever were able to create nuclear weapons, that they'd actually use them?
I think that nothing should be removed from the table when we ask what is Iran prepared to do. When Americans could never imagine that Islamic terrorists would fly planes into buildings and kill thousands of people. Israel never imagined that Hamas, just across the border, would invade their communities and slaughter and do horrible atrocities of a kind not seen since the Holocaust. So when you come to extreme Islamists, um, open your imagination to what they're capable of. And the Islamic regime of Iran are extreme radical Shiites. They are willing to die for their beliefs. They have theocratic beliefs that have nothing to do with what we in the people in the West, the way we think, the way you think. President Trump says, and other U.S. presidents, well, their economy is going to improve if they do this and that, and once they have to govern, and this, that is not how they think. That is not how they think. These are people who are willing to be suicide bombers. Their martyrdom is the ultimate value for them, not life. And I think they're willing to do anything. And so if they have the nuclear weapons, number one, just having it, they can blackmail and threaten the world. But I believe that they would be willing to use it. And they've said things like, oh, it's good that the Jews are gathering in Israel. This is a number of years ago, because that will make it easier if we want to kill them. It was either Iran or one of their allies who said that. And I wouldn't put it past them.
Hillel Neuer, thank you so much for your work and for stopping by the podcast again.
Thank you for having me.